Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willies, your host. Today, we're honored once again to have Dr. Richard D. Wolff. Dr. Richard D. Wolff is the professor of economics emeritus at University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He is the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book is Understanding Capitalism and is available along with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info, among the many other books that he has written, of course. Dr. Wolff, I want to ask you a few questions about today's realities. How would you describe the current state of our country as we elected Donald Trump once again?
I'm going to be very blunt and honest with you in the hopes that that's what you want and that that's what your audience wants.
Absolutely.
I find the United States today in a state that I would describe, borrowing from the field of psychology, as in a state of denial. It's a denial of the realities this country faces because we seem to want politicians who will help us deny what is indeed a scary situation. So let me tell you what the situation is, and I think you'll understand why the word denial is appropriate. Coming out of World War II, the United States was the dominant, successful world economy. All the others that might have played that role, Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, had been destroyed or defeated or both by World War II. In contrast, other than Pearl Harbor, no bombs fell on the United States, no factories were destroyed. On the contrary, the mammoth unemployment of the Great Depression of the 1930s had been overcome because during the war, we took half the unemployed people and put them in uniform, and we took the other half of the unemployed people and gave them jobs making the uniforms and the guns and the bullets and all the rest. In other words, the war put America back to work, boosted the economy. So by 1945, we were the king of the world. The dollar became the global currency. The United States produced half the output of the world. We helped the rest of the world recover from the war because we were in such economic boom times. Okay, anyone with half a brain would have known that that was an exceptional situation. That could not possibly last. Those defeated and destroyed countries would come back. Let me name them for you. Russia, Japan, Germany. I could go on, but you see what happened. The second half of the 20th century was the American Empire. Oh boy, all the other empires, the British Empire in India, gone. The Dutch or the French empires in Africa, gone. I could go on. All the colonial people rose up and got rid of their oppressors that had made them colonies in the first place. And the United States came in and said, we'll help you. We will replace the British, the French, the Japanese, and the Germans. And we could, and we did. And we put military bases, 700 of them, across the world. All right, we were the king of the hill. Now, here's the first reality. We're not anymore. That period of American history, the dominance of the American empire, is over. We lost the war in Vietnam. That should have been the first sign. That was a war against the Communist Party of North Vietnam. You know who runs Vietnam, North and South now? The Communist Party. They won, we lost. In Afghanistan, we fought against something called the Taliban. We then were defeated. You know who runs Afghanistan now? The Taliban, not the United States. I could go on. We lost in Iraq, and we are in the process of losing in Ukraine. Uh, but you know what we do as a nation faced with this? We deny it. We act like it isn't happening. We act like a 3-year-old confronted with a dog who's scary because the dog is barking. Dog doesn't mean any harm, but the dog is barking. The little 3-year-old, understandably, is upset. And you know what the 3-year-old does? Puts his or her little hands in front of their eyes, thinking that if they can't see it, it won't be there.
Exactly.
It takes them another year or two to grow up and to discover, no, you can put your hand there, but the doggy will still be there, and you'll have to find another way to cope. We're like the 3-year-old. We got some growing to do. We've got to face it. I'm an economist. Let me give you another way to understand this. The United States has a group of major economic allies. They're called the G7. It's the United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. 7 countries that have been, in the second half of the 20th century, the economic center of the world. If you were a poor country in Asia, Africa, or Latin America, you went to Washington or London to get a loan, to get help, to build your market. It was the economic powerhouse. The IMF is a creature of the G7. The World Bank is a creature of the G7. I mean, they run the show. Okay, but now in the last 40 years, a whole nother economic power block has grown in the world. It's called the BRICS, BRICS. Those initials stand for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They started with those 5 countries 10 or 12 years ago. They are now 22 countries, and they are China with its major allies. And they are now what? Let me drive it home. They are wealthier by a lot than the G7.
Oh, I didn't know they bypassed the G7. Wow.
Oh, they bypassed it. Let me do it this way. We in economics have a number we call the GDP, gross domestic product. It's a rough measure of the output of goods and services in 1 year in any country. So we measure that, and it gives us, an idea of who's bigger, who's littler. If you add up the GDP of the United States and the remaining of the G7, it works out that those 7 countries produce about, these days, 27, maybe 28% of total output in the world. But there's 120 countries in the world, but these 7 account for 27%. Now let's look at the BRICS. You add up the GDP in each of their countries, it accounts for, get ready, 35%. Not close. They were equal in 2020. Here we are 5 years later, and the gap is growing. Let me give you another statistic finally. The International Monetary Fund, which is a Western Washington-controlled institution, announced with great fanfare that it keeps these records, that the American economy, the U.S. economy, will grow in 2024, the year just ended, 2.8%. And that is larger than any of the other G7 countries is growing. Germany, for example, is in recession. It is only not growing, is shrinking. Okay, but the IMF also tells us that in 2024, the economy of the People's Republic of China will grow 5%. That's almost double the amount.
Yeah.
And India will grow 7%. That's almost triple. In other words, the gap is getting wider. We are not the world center of the economy. We aren't. And we're not going there. And we haven't been there for a while already. But we don't know it in America because we pretend. Let me be really blunt. Mr. Trump, nor Mr. Biden, nor Ms. Harris was able or willing to confront what I just said. It's common knowledge. I'm not basing anything I'm saying on any kind of special research. It takes 10 minutes to go to the relevant statistics and confirm everything I've just said. The advisors of those politicians, they know. I know some of them, and I know that they know. So this is silly. Look, Egberto, I'm only saying this so people understand. I've been a professor of economics all my life. I went to school at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. I'm like a poster boy for elite American education. They worked very hard to persuade me, as they did most of my schoolmates, that capitalism is the greatest thing since sliced bread. They really tried hard. And some of them were really good teachers, have learned from them. But they never persuaded me. And nothing since I graduated has persuaded me either. American capitalism is in very deep trouble. I mean, it means that our president has to do weird things, like say, I want to take back the Panama Canal. Are you kidding? You're that desperate? You got it? What? These are not signs of strength. Let me give you another example because I think your audience will like it. Most of the history of the United States was constituted by waves of immigrants that came here from Britain, from Ireland, from all the countries of Europe, and then later from other parts of the world, Africa, Latin America. We all know that story. Most of them came willingly. The slaves were forced. But it was waves of immigrants. And if you think the United States became a big and powerful country, which it did, in the 19th and 20th century, which it did, that was because, here we go, it was able to absorb waves of immigrants, because immigrants are a subsidy to your capitalism. You know why? They're mostly working age people. The very young and the very old are left at home for all the obvious reasons. The working age, which means the cost of feeding and clothing them through their childhood, of educating them until they got to be adults who could work. All of that was a burden on the societies they left, not a cost to the United States. We just got the adult worker, and we got them and we put them to work. We gave them the crappiest jobs at the lowest salary. They lived in the worst housing, the poorest schools. You all know the history. Every wave was put that way. But you know what it meant? Each wave enabled those who had come before to move up the ladder.
Standard of living, yes.
And that was the promise that was given to them. When Mr. Trump deports immigrants, it's a sign, a proof that the American economy is weak. It can't absorb them. It has no place for them. It is sending them away. Wow. That's a president presiding over a glaring flaw and weakness. Now, you can face it, talk about it, try to find a solution. We don't do that. Here's what we do. We deny that it's a problem. We try to blame the victim of all of this, the poor immigrant. Those of us that are white are descendants of previous immigrants to this country who came voluntarily, hoping by making a contribution of working hard, they could find a place. These latest immigrants have exactly the same motivation and the same mentality, but it's the United States that can't handle it. We're not growing fast enough. China is, India is, but we're not. And that's the root of the problem of immigration. But instead, our leaders call this all a powerful affirmation of America first. We're going to take care. It's a denial game. It's when you can't face the real problem that you make of it. That's why Mr. Trump has to talk about an invasion of them. That kind of exaggeration, what's that about? That's denial. He can't face what is it about America that what made us great, absorbing immigrants, we're not going to do anymore. And you know what the result will be? Will make us ungreat.
Yeah.
You may wear a red hat, but what you're doing is the opposite.
You kind of answered two of the three questions in that narrative. My question then is the outlook. I mean, where we stand. What will the outlook be? Especially since we're talking about a Trump, which is not one of the best thinkers, and the people that are running him right now, they are just out for themselves. What's the outlook as you see it?
Well, I think you're seeing and you will see more and more denial. You're going to see theatrics. You're going to see ICE officials deporting people over into Mexico, and you're going to see saber rattling with the Chinese in Taiwan, or maybe we'll snatch. The United States likes a fair fight, so it'll be the United States Army against the Panamanian Army, all 11 of them. It's just, it will be theatric. Look, Mr. Trump got into office by an elaborate theater, demonizing this people, insulting that. That's all he does. And people love it because they don't want to face their own problems, and they love this clownish character, making them feel big and strong and powerful, because the reality is they aren't, and they're not about to be, and they don't want to face it. We'll outgrow it. People do. It's childish. Meanwhile, however, here's my prediction. All of the problems are getting worse because he's not dealing with them. He's not admitting they're even there. China continues to outproduce the United States. Every one of the tech billionaires in America, whether it's Bezos at Amazon or Musk at Tesla or any of the others, have their counterparts in China. China has its own Twitter. China has its own Amazon. And those are bigger and are facing a much bigger market. The population represented by the 22 countries in the BRICS, the population is over half the people on this planet.
Yeah.
What is the population of the United States as a share of the people on this planet? 4.5%.
Yeah.
Do you understand? 4.5%, 55 to 60%. There's no content. They are going to continue to build their powerful alternative economy. The United States set out to isolate communism, China, Russia. And the end result is to isolate the United States. And the longer we do what we do around the world, lose in Ukraine, complicit in what Israel is doing in Palestine, these only isolate the United States further. And all the bravado and all the bluster don't work. Every time the war in Ukraine went badly, the United States gave the Ukrainians bigger and better weapons. They weren't going to get tanks, they got them. They weren't going to get F-16s, they got them. They weren't going to get long-range missiles, they got them. They weren't going to be allowed to shoot them into deep Russia, they have the allowance. Guess what? It doesn't matter. You can't win over there. But since you can't face losing, you can't admit that it can't work, you keep on going. And all that does is make you lose. It's so sad as I read, even my colleagues, we're going to defeat the Russians. No, you're not. You're not. I'm no fan of Mr. Putin. There's nothing to do with that. I'm just looking at what you got. Well, it's costing them a lot in the war. let me just end with this. It is costing him a lot. You know what costs a lot? War. A big war costs a lot. The last time the United States fought a big war, this was called World War II, a really big one. And you know what it did to the American economy? Brought it out of a depression. It was the best thing that could have happened. Guess what's happening in Russia? Americans who should know from their own history are watching Russia make more money. Russia's growing faster this year than the United States. What are you talking about? Why this denial and this fantasy? I get up in the morning, Egberto, really, and I read my New York Times and my Wall Street Journal, as I have to for my work, and I'm saying to myself, Americans are a smart people. Americans are intelligent people. What is going on here? And then I remember something, and I'll leave you with this, even though it's scary. When Hitler came to power in Germany, many Germans looked at each other and said, what's going on here? We Germans are a smart, hardworking, creative, efficient people. And they were, and they are, just like Americans. But if you're under too much pressure, if the world is making it too hard for you to face it, that the American empire, like every empire before us, had its go up and then came down. We're in the down phase. That's not fun. Much better going up than coming down. But we are, and pretending we're not is not a reasonable way to respond.
Dr. Richard Wolff is a professor of economics emeritus at University of Massachusetts Amherst. Thank you so kindly for being once again on Politics Done Right.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.